Hey, cozy gloves here. I'm wearing a hat. Today we're going to be talking about the structure of a big room track. So here I've got a big room track I've been working on. It's not totally done, but what we have here is we have a typical structure or an arrangement, so to speak. So here, there's a variety of ways we can approach things. So we're just going to start at the beginning and work our way down. So first we have the intro. The intro, there's a couple ways to start an intro that are typical to big room. One of them is to start with a false riser. So I actually put my false riser after what I consider to be the intro in this case. What is a false riser? A false riser is something that rises to another riser. It's like, oh, that was just another riser. You know, like you're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, then like, bam, then you get it. Like after the real riser is the one that goes into the drop. So that's a false riser. See, it's a rise that goes into another riser. It could be a rise that goes into something that's not a riser, and then that goes into a riser. Like, you know, it just doesn't go to the drop, basically. So so you can start with a false riser. You could start with the introduction of a theme, which is what I do. I start with a melody. And you can see that away we go. And we've already got some sort of an idea going, gives the listener a really strong point to listen to. Another thing some people will go with is they'll just start with the drum beat. And so I sort of start with the drum beat, but I decided to move the drum beat through a filter, basically. And the drum beat comes more and more in. And then right here, we've pretty much arrived with our drum beat coming in, but it's still only, I've been holding off this whole time because I'm only using an intro kick. So the real kick comes in when we get over here. But anyways, those are some intro options. So you can start with a beat. You can start with some sort of a rhythmic idea. You don't even need the drums. You can start with a melodic idea. So just start with something the listener can grab onto and say, hey, this is going to be an interesting thing to listen to. Then we get to the next section. So the next section, you can choose to do it as I chose false rise in this case, but it's also sort of a development. So you can choose to do development, or you can choose to do a false rise. Typically, the riser doesn't happen because these things, the tempo of a big room track is usually around 128, 130. You could vary it, go down to 124 or whatever, but typically they're hanging around there. 128 is like the stereotypical tempo. So FL opens up a 130 by default, so I just ran with 130. I'm sure tons of other FL users probably have done the same thing at some point. So you can mess with tempo, but there's not a very big tempo window in this genre. Now, I chose the false rise, and that means that I'm going to have it rise and rise and rise, but I said I sort of mix the two. So a false rise is just something that rises. Think of that snare thing that's like dun, 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 you know, like one of those, just some sort of riser. And this is a false rise in that I introduced a couple concepts here. So I have my melody, and that's still going. But I introduced a couple layers and some chords, and I bring them in through filters. And so I'm developing the sound. I'm not totally developing the melody. I don't change the melody, but I change what's going on around the melody. I add some extra lines. And there are various methods of composition that we'll get into that sort of lend themselves to creating something like this. I refer to it as block composition or pattern composition, and sometimes I use them in part of my drop too, and we'll get into that in a future video. But anyways, you can see here that that's what I'm talking about. So we've developed the sound, and we've added a couple more parts. We're building on what we've established in our intro, and I've also chosen to do a false rise, so things are rising up. Some people just do a straight rise, like it's literally just a rise, like nothing really crazy happens here. They have like that dun, 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 like they just literally, that's all they do. It's sort of interesting sometimes. I have these guys down here. These serve as transitional elements to go from one motion of a song to another, and they also allow me to slip in a couple extra new sounds that are going to play a role in the development of the track that won't be as jarring as they would be otherwise. So that's sort of the idea behind these effects things down here, like those sorts of things allow me, when it goes I can slip in a couple, like the pads and a couple other things, and then I can filter them in more and more gradually. Unless you want to be abrupt, I didn't want to be as abrupt here, so I decided to give the listener a big cue, because in this sort of music, you give listeners like a heads up. It's just what you do. That way they can be ready and get excited. If they don't know what you really do, if you really want to be good, is you give them a cue, that something's going to happen, but then you put it off like another 8 bars or whatever. So they think it's going to happen there, and they're like, oh, it didn't happen yet. This is going to be really crazy. And then they get really excited. So yeah, that's just the way you do. Okay, so we go through there. We got a development. The drum pattern comes in. So if we play through this little section, you can see this is a false rise. You feel like this could go somewhere. Now, it's deliberately a weaker rise. Some people make these rises very strong to really give the impression of a drop. I didn't do that. Mine sort of hints that we're going to a riser section still. It doesn't feel like you could go straight to the drop from this guy. But if we listen to it... So you see, it cues you in that like something else that's not big enough. It's not. So, and I have a couple more of those transitional elements, and then I have a couple impacts and things that I used here. And there's a sub drop here. I just use this. These are so easy to make. We can make them. I decided to just grab one. So here I pull an interesting move. It's a little daring in a composition where you kind of rely on 2 or 3 melodies. I have several more than that. So I was just going crazy writing melodies. But I have what I've done here is I enter the riser. And at the riser, this is cool as the intro. And I want to stick with these. This was based on a chord structure. And then over here, this loses the chord structure a bit. But I take it, and I actually, this was originally composed inside of here. So I knew they would fit well together, but then I took it out and put it over here. So it was based on that, but then I messed with it, creating a different melody that deviated from the chords a touch. And it's just a totally new sound, totally new idea. It's very contrasting compared to this one. We have the pluck sound, and then we hit this bang, like this long tone. It's a very different feel. And you could tell that this is definitely rising because there's I have some risers going up down here along with the snare rise halfway through. 16 bar riser. And I start out with these subharmonics in the sound and I actually remove them as I go farther along. Well, you might be going, why? Well, I want my sound to thin out. That way when the drop hits, I have a little more impact. And it's sort of a mixing move, but not really. I considered it more of a sound design move because I haven't approached mixing yet in this track. And so we get to this. Now the riser doesn't have to be just this. You could use a theme. A lot of people, what they'll do is they'll have a pattern, a melody of some kind, like a pluck, and then they'll start bringing in the longer sound, making it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they'll cue up some rise sounds and whatever, stuff that indicates that, hey, things are getting crazy, and then they'll use that into their breakdown. Sometimes they go straight into the drop. So that's your riser. We're going to talk about risers in a future video. Then you have your breakdown. Your breakdown is just the part where you lose it. It doesn't make sense totally always to go into the drop because that's like too sudden. They need something that's like crazy and sort of refreshes the palate before you give them the crazy thing they've been waiting for. It's like the glass of water or the salt crackers you take in between meals or entrees or whatever it is. I'm not that fancy of an eater, but you know what it means. You have to cleanse your palate a bit to get ready for the next really great thing. So then we have our breakdown, and I use a typical snare sound here. And I also found a live drum fill in the midst of these ridiculous amounts of samples and chopped it up to fit what I wanted a little bit better. And these things, you can do anything here, anything. Like just make it sound crazy, man. You could get something that's really like anticlimactic, like someone saying, "Hey, what's up?" And then like the drop, like people just love it. You just give them something they don't expect to be coming, or if I did something that they would expect to be coming, but you make it sound like crazy, so it's still like exciting. Like something's gonna go down here, and so people are really on edge, and this is a really great spot to sort of give it to them. And then you hit your drop, and your drop, you could cue up into your drop through like a reverse cymbal, which I do later, or some sort of a small rise in here. But I decided to go with the crazier breakdown, and then on the drop, that's when you just unleash. This is the best part of your song. This is the part that if someone listens to is what they're going to remember, right? This is the drop, the hook, whatever you want to call it, this is it. Like, this is the thing you want them to remember. So I have a couple of introductory elements here, like some impacts, but this thing repeats on important phrases. So you can see that it repeats every 4 bars. That way the listener is being sort of cued into the structure of what I'm doing. I also have an ARP that you can barely hear, but it's there, and it's creating a backbeat for me along with the drum beat. But the big thing is I've entered this tonal kick. This is a big thing, and so it sounds kind of dumb by itself, but when you put it in context. Now, this hasn't been mixed, and I still think it sounds a little dumb. So this is something that these things are so darn freaking touchy. Like, I gotta go through here and just make it the way I want it. But you find a kick, and now you could go with regular, like these sorts of sounds, just like a regular kick. But tonal kicks are sort of an element from electro. They started out, they're really known in hardstyle, and then like really laid back, like they're not nearly as aggressive. So you can start with the hardstyle kick and shape it into what would later become an electro kick. And then, or you could go with these. The 4 to the floor, though. That's the rule. So you take 4. I actually went with a moving tonal kick line, too. So it actually changes as I go through this. These things actually are really freaking complicated. So I'm not sure how far we're going to delve into some of this stuff. But anyways, you get the idea. We have our breakdown, and then we hit our drop. Our drop is the big part. And now there's a couple different styles of drops. You have your repetitive, what I would call motif drops. Motif just means a theme. So you pick some sort of a phrase you like. Like maybe you like the phrase da 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 da. And so you say, all right, I'm going to use that phrase with a bunch of different sounds as opposed. So you make it sort of more of a complexo drop. So like da 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 dun 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 da 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 dun, like something like that. Like it's repetitive, very easy to jive to, and then you get crazy maybe with your drums. Your drums are a little more interesting. Here, I went for a melodic drop, and I stayed with the same sound. So I said same sound, but I'm going to have a freaking awesome sounding melody thing. And so that's what I did. I quite like this melody. I think it sounds really cool. So I wrote this, and I was like, yes, that's what I want. And then I went with the kick, and all this other stuff serves the purpose of this melody. I just want people to get into the melody. The downside of this is it's not quite as catchy or hard-hitting as, like, say, an electro drop that has a repeating phrase, one of those motif drops. And then you just create subtle variations at important moments, generally at the weak points of the track where you're most susceptible to a change, such as, like, the last bar of a 4-bar phrase. Or a really good spot is if you made it an 8-bar phrase and then you just mess with that last one here, which you can see I'm taking advantage of those things even in a melodic drop. So you have those. You'll also hear the pluck sounds, and you'll hear various combinations of what I would call more rhythmic drops. So it has a melody interleaved in it, sort of, but it's really based on the rhythm and the way the elements interact. It's more of a timbral experience. You hear a lot of different sounds that form and come together to form almost like a whole new line. And so those are the 3 kind of drops I would picture. You have your motif drop, you have your rhythmic drop, which is the timbral, which I would put timbral drops into a category of that, some sort of a rhythmic drop, which is like, I think of like glitch hop, like really funky glitch hop, like Opio or someone like that. Now those aren't as common, but you can make all these are styles of drop. They don't necessarily fit into one genre or the other. Just some genres they're a lot more prevalent in, but you could make big room versions of this. Like I've heard big room tracks with all of these. So again, rhythmic, timbral, and then you have melodic. So here I chose a melodic drop. And so if we give this a listen from the breakdown and the riser, so we hear the rise, the breakdown, and then the drop. Okay, so as you can see, I do a little bit of development in this drop. So this thing is constantly changing. It's basically like a solo. And you notice that things don't get in the way of this guy. That's like the point of this sort of a drop. The kick, ironically, may not be the most important element in this. So it already kind of has the hierarchy of importance I want. I just may want to fudge a little things just to create more space and definition in the mix. And then I also developed it with an additional kick loop. And here I just wanted something that had some sort of a downbeat and an upbeat. And I was like, that's perfect. So I just tossed that in there and that was great. So it's just a layer. Like, you don't even notice it comes in. It just gives a little more emphasis to the downbeats. And that's what I was going for. So here, after that, we reach what I would call the bridge. So we go from our drop to our bridge, and we have all those different types of drops. Now the bridge is generally some sort of a new thing. Here you have a couple different types of bridges as well. So you could write a new thing and put it here, and that would be the bridge. And it's almost like an extended breakdown, but not as crazy. It's like a little more laid back. A lot of bridges also serve where it's not a new thing. It's an old thing, which is what I do here. So we just went through this like experience. And so now I'm like, hey, but do you remember that thing from way back there? But I add in a couple new elements. Namely, this drum loop is new, and I'm making it more complicated with this delay line, which is a little counterintuitive to big room because they typically have not very much going on in way of percussion and drums, but I like to get a little more complicated with my stuff. I think it's a little more interesting to listen to. And so here we've got like the same melody and sound from back at the beginning. And so this is like a recap, like a reminder, like, hey, remember this thing from over there? And I also add in a pad that creates this atmosphere. If we were to listen to this sound on its own. So you have that drone sound, this guy, it's going around. And so it's very sort of a heavenly type sound. And yeah, so that's the bridge. So you can recap or you can add something new. Some people make long bridges with whole development sections in them. Typically not in big room, but in big room, you have some sort of like an 8-bar bridge or whatever that sort of takes you away from, because what you need to do is you need to take them away from the epicness that just happened, but in a way that's still pleasing. And then you bring them back. So you could do a variety of things here. You can make this even longer. Some people do. I went for a short little 8-bar thing. And then I go through a similar development. So here it's like the same development. I add in a couple new elements, but this is another thing is they typically repeat. This isn't something that's like super complicated with the structure. Like you don't come up with whole new sections. That's not super common. Even though I know I just said that with the bridge, and I mean, if you want to, you can. You definitely be very unique. You kind of leave the realm of big room a little bit when you do that, in my book. And because, maybe you have a different book than I do. That's all. It's all good. They're just words, just definitions. So anyways, I enter another rise, and it's the same rise as over here. And on this occasion, I add in, the drum loop. That's pretty much it. I might have changed some of the stuff. It might even be the exact same pattern 26. Yep, it is. It's the exact same pattern. So it rises in. I thought it was dynamic and interesting enough to be worth repeating. So that's what I did. Now on the breakdown, I do that reverse cymbal thing. So I bring in the reverse cymbal and we hit. And so, yeah, you've kind of got the main elements now. You can create themes, establish motifs, which are tiny themes, like little phrases. Yeah, so as we get through here, we get to the breakdown again, and then we reach a new drop. Now this drop has like an extended breakdown almost. So on this one, I instead of doing a whole new melody, I take the same sound and go at it, and then I make a new sound. This is the part I'm very likely to change. But like if we just listen to like from the riser, from the last 2 bars of the riser into the breakdown and through this little area right here, I'm still working on this part, but you can kind of get an idea of what I'm going after. So you see, it's sort of a little clunky on the transition. So this is something I'm looking at revamping. I may even just get rid of it and completely change the whole thing. Like that's something else when you're writing music, you just need to be willing to just delete crap. So we come in, a similar deal though, a drop, and then we reach, in this case, I have an outro on the drop that fits a little bit better. And then I go through the bridge again, except for I change up some of the automation so that it fades away the main melody, which originally this faded in. This is right there after the drop. And then we reach an outro. Outros are just to, there's a cut. Okay, so there's like your DJ outro. We're going to make this so that it's easy for the DJ to blend with another track. Maybe you have an extended drums going out for like an extra 30 seconds or whatever. That's pretty common. But I didn't do that. I wanted more of a formal outro. So formal, I mean, as in it literally fits the form, the structure of what it is I'm writing. So it recaps that theme one more time, but in a new voice, and then it filters a little bit differently. And then when it cuts out, I let the reverb trail be the ending of my song. So if we listen to this, you can hear it. I really like endings like that. They are cool to me. They're like, oh, like it just happened. Like that's cool. So that's my outro. I think outros are pretty easy to figure out after you've written your track, because then you have themes and stuff. You could recap something, some sort of a major theme, and just call it good after that. Or you could add on more. I could write more to this song, but I think it would be not so great if I did that. Plus, I'm still fiddling with the second drop. So I actually quite like the ending. I think a 2.5 minute, 3-minute song is good. If you're going for like a 4-minute song, you just extend some of your development. So maybe instead of having the false rise be 8 bars, you have it be a little bit longer. It is kind of common. I've really noticed though for the riser to hit around 30 seconds, like boom, riser now. So yeah, so that's that. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.